Good morning. Thank you for all of you for joining us here at the World Medical Innovation Forum. And I do think we have a special treat today in that we are going to have this opportunity to have a chat with Joe Jimenez from Novartis. Novartis, first of all, let us thank you, Joe, and the whole Novartis team for being the lead sponsor of the World Medical Innovation Forum. In addition to that, I think that it's a special opportunity for us to take advantage of the fact that Joe came all the way from Switzerland to spend some time with us this morning. And I know that many of you will have some questions for Joe, and so please submit them. I'll have a chance to do them as we moderate the discussion this morning, but I'm going to go ahead and start. Joe is the leader of the CEO of Novartis. Prior to that, spent some time in a number of companies, including Heinz in the product side. Comes out of Stanford, and I think most notably to me, Joe is also a very disciplined athlete, an NCAA Division I swimmer who swam the breaststroke at the NCAA finals. Pretty amazing. Thanks. And that's the type of person I think that we have leading our pharmaceutical industry today. Let me begin just by making their remark just from seeing the program, listening to prior panels here. This is a really exciting time in cancer, and it's exciting because we have all of these wonderful things coming together. We have, patients. We have extraordinary innovation. We have biology and really remarkable breakthroughs. And we've had a chance to hear about a number of them over the course of the last few days. With that said, we have lots of challenges. And we talked about earlier in the prior panel, they touched for a moment on cost, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. And also this notion of, boy, the good news is there's so much good stuff going on out there. The challenge is there is so much good stuff going on out there. So how does a company like Novartis, how do you stay focused?
Well, when you think about Novartis, we have cancer in our DNA. If you have to go all the way back to the early 2000s when we introduced the first targeted therapy with Gleevec, and that essentially turned what was a death sentence if you were diagnosed with CML into a chronic disease. And so from there, the company has spent a lot of time and a lot of resources identifying the next technology, the next targeted therapy that will change the practice of cancer therapy. And the way that we're focusing ourselves is we are focused on 5 essential cancers: lung, breast, melanoma, renal cell carcinoma, and hematology. And we're investing very heavily on technologies. We'll be technology agnostic as to ways to address. But I think by focusing on those 5 cancers, we're really able to harness our resources in an effective way.
Do you ever worry that by focusing on the 5, you're going to miss something amazing going on in another disease area, and that it may actually be applicable to the 5 that you're already focused on?
Yeah, we see strategy as a roadmap. So we have a very strong research organization that is agnostic to the particular area, but so if there is something that we identify or discover in a particular type of cancer, we obviously would pursue that. But having the 5 allows us to harness our resources in a particular way, but again, not miss something and be an outlier.
So even with those 5, though, you have this extraordinarily large portfolio. So I hate to ask a parent to choose a favorite child, but I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you to tell us what excites you the most.
Well, we have a number of exciting agents in our pipeline. On the targeted therapy side, you heard Bill Sellers earlier talk about ABL-001, which is a new agent for CML that looks like potentially, together with Gleevec, could be another step change in treatment in CMLs. We also have LEE-001, which is our anti-CDK4. We think that while it may not be first to class, it could be best in class, and so we're looking forward to also filing that this year. And then on the immuno-oncology side, we were late to the game with the first round of checkpoint inhibitors, but we're very focused on what we're calling second-generation immuno-oncology. If you think about the checkpoint inhibitors like PD-1, they'll work in about 1/3 of cases where the T cell has penetrated the tumor, but for some reason is not attacking, and the anti-PD-L or PD-1 will enable that T cell to attack the tumor cell. But in 2/3 of cases, the immune system doesn't even recognize the tumor as foreign. And so the ability to impact the microenvironment is where we're focusing. So we have 5 agents that are in clinical development right now, with another 5 to enter. And so we're quite excited with what this will bring. It won't be this year, it won't be next year, but if you think about Novartis in probably a 3 to 5 year time period, we're going to be strong in the next generation of immuno-oncology.
Yeah, so as we talk about immuno-oncology and that 3 to 5 year time horizon, how is it that how is Novartis is thinking about approaching this over the longer term? Is this, a 10, 15 year play? Is this a 3 to 5 year?
Now, this is a 15 to 20 year play. I mean, I believe that in immuno-oncology, we're in the very early stages, and the checkpoint inhibitors are first. The CAR-T technology that we're involved in is also very early. So we're thinking about this as a very long-term horizon. We've been able to attract to Novartis scientists like Glenn Drainoff, who just joined us last year, Jeff Engelman, who's joined the company. And so we are really looking at a 10 to 15, even 20 year play.
Terrific. One of the things I think that's going to be on many people's minds today is we had a brief discussion in the last panel and touched on it briefly about costs. I think many folks here in the room appreciate there's congressional hearings today in the wake of Turing and Daraprim pricing. Lots of kind of rancor within the medical community about drug pricing. How is it that you see the industry kind of emerging from this? How are you going to take this challenge and kind of move the industry forward?
Pricing is obviously a very difficult topic. When you think about, the first thing you have to think about is that pharmaceuticals are about 10% of the total healthcare cost. And so there's still 90%. We have to help the health systems, not just in the US, but around the world, move to a sustainable platform where all patients can have access to all medicines and also all therapy. And so the way that we think about it is we're going to have to shift away from what has been a transactional approach with these healthcare systems where we're selling the pill to an outcomes-based approach where we're essentially selling the outcome. And I think if we move along that continuum, Novartis is a company that has already started down that continuum with payers, I think we can help put health systems on a more sustainable footing. For example, we're starting to change the way that we think about pricing of oncology drugs. It's in the very early stages, but to be able to talk about value, the value that the medicine brings, instead of pricing just versus the current standard of care. So we think about value in essentially 4 pillars. First, what is the medical benefit that this drug brings? The clinical benefit in terms of overall survival or progression-free survival. There's a value there. Then what is the patient value? This is the second pillar of value. Have we improved quality of life? Are we enabling the patient to live a better, happier life? There's a value there. The next pillar of value will be around health system. So are we able to either lower cost to the health system, or are we able to bring a new therapy that enables that system to rely less on the physician visit and more on self-administration? So there's a health system benefit and value. And then finally, there's a societal value. So what does this new medicine bring in terms of societal benefit, bringing productivity to that patient who can then go back to work? So when you look at the 4 pillars of value, then the question is, how much does this new medicine bring? And then what will Novartis capture in terms of that value, and how much value will be left for the other 4 stakeholders in that? So we're in the early stages, but I do think we have to start to shift the way that we price our medicines and to be able to talk about that in terms of the value that we bring.
Yeah, and I think as I hear about those 4 pillars, it sounds incredibly right-headed, and I think it also sounds pretty complex. So there's going to be a lot of work to do that. And I think one of the things I think would be interesting to hear a little bit more about is how Novartis' approach Entresto and how you're using that model and maybe how that applies to what's going to go on in cancer in the future?
Yeah, obviously, part of the problem is data. We need the data to be able to identify value in those various buckets. And we just launched a heart failure drug called Entresto. And Entresto clinically has been proven to reduce cardiovascular death by 20% versus standard of care, and also reduce hospitalization by 20%. And when you think about the value to the health system that this drug can bring by reducing hospitalization by 20% for a heart failure cohort of patients, it's significant. So we have been proposing and have had different levels of success contracting with payers on an outcome for Entresto. So where we have essentially a base price plus rebate, but then it flexes off of the degree to which we are able to reduce total hospitalization. I think this is a very crude but beginning step in terms of outcomes-based pricing, and I think it's where the industry is headed. And so we're using this as a way to start down that path, to start to put the data collecting infrastructure in place. But if you think 20 years from now, I really believe that companies like Novartis are going to be paid on the outcome, not based on the number of pills that we sell.
Yeah, and I would say absolutely don't sell yourself short on that being crude. I think the reality is that all of us in healthcare right now are struggling with how we're going to provide value and how we do that at an affordable cost. Your comment about crude reminds me of looking up the Wright brothers airplane in the National Air and Space Museum, and you look at it and you say, oh my God, that thing is so crude. And at the same time, wow, it flew. And I think that in many ways, these steps of trying to think about readmissions and as a means of valuing a drug, that's really pretty an amazing breakthrough. Another issue around the whole cost of pharma issue is how do you see this fitting in to the sustainability of healthcare in general? You've actually been very vocal, and something we share in common. We both talk a lot about sustainable health systems. What do you think the role is for a company like Novartis in trying to move us forward and getting our thinking right on sustainability?
I spent a lot of time thinking about that sustainability of healthcare systems, because when you think about what's going to happen in the world, we're going to add about 1 billion people to the population over the next 10 years, and half of that number, 500 million, are going to be over the age of 50. So when you think about the burden that is going to be on health systems in the US, but also around the world, it's tremendous. And that is a threat to companies like Novartis, and it's a threat to medical innovation progressing. Because in a scenario like that, you have a situation where costs are going to be contained, care is going to be rationed. And so it's very important for us to determine processes and programs that can lead to overall sustainability. And that's why I believe that a combination of shifting towards outcomes, not just for pharmaceutical companies, but also for every element of the healthcare system along a disease pathway. The brilliance of focusing on the outcome is that for a particular disease, you define with the payer and the healthcare provider what outcome is best for the patient in a particular disease. And then you look at all elements of, let's say, intervention along that disease pathway, and you get rid of those elements that don't deliver the ultimate outcome that you're after. And if you do that, we believe that we can save somewhere between 25 and 30% of the cost of healthcare in total. That's over $1 trillion. If we could take that out of healthcare, we are well on our way to building sustainability into this system as the population ages. So that's what's at stake, and that's why we're playing our part in terms of helping systems around the world shift towards that outcomes approach. It has huge implications for our research and development strategy, because no longer will a Me Too drug be part of an outcome. You're just not going to get reimbursed. So you're either going to have to be first in class, or you're going to have to be best in class, and you're going to have to deliver a value to the outcome And that means that way upstream, we're going to have to start thinking about that.
Yeah, that's terrific. And I think it's, again, part of my role is looking how can we get waste out, how can we improve our processes, how can we streamline the experience of care for a patient, and hearing your partnership in that is really terrific. As you think about trying to extend the wonderful work that you're doing at Novartis to the developing world, to low-income countries, what's your strategy there? How do you take these models for maybe future payment mechanisms and apply them in very, very different environments?
Well, as we're thinking about emerging markets, the question is, how are we able to create affordable medicine in those markets? So, for example, many of those emerging markets do not have reimbursement or insurance, so a lot of it is out of pocket. So obviously, if you're dealing with that, you're thinking about a different cost structure, a different pricing structure, but the overall objective is to ensure that patients that need the drug in a particular disease are able to have access. So we have a number of access programs. We just launched a brand called Novartis Access, in which we're bringing 15 molecules to some of the least developed countries in the world, and we're pricing it at $1 a month per treatment for each of the 15 new drugs. And it's an experiment to see if we can improve access in those least developed countries where there is not an infrastructure of reimbursement and payment, and yet there's still patients in need.
And when I think about getting access to those medications in those environments, there are many steps that go from a patient presenting with a problem through to getting the right therapy for them. And part of that is how we figure out how diagnostics fit in. And when you talk about that notion of trying to look at all the steps in the care path and getting out waste, how is Novartis approaching the integration of diagnostics into what you're doing?
We're thinking about diagnostics not as a business, but as a way to ensure that the right patient has the right drug at the right time. So our oncology group has a very well-developed companion diagnostic team that is quite technology agnostic to what type of technology we're going to use for a particular companion diagnostic. But most, if not all, of our targeted agents in our pipeline are being brought to market with a companion diagnostic. And again, it comes down to an outcome, meaning if you have an outcomes-based approach, you are taking a very targeted approach to those patients that are going to have the greatest ability to respond to that drug, and that's going to require a companion diagnostic in most cases.
Yeah. So with all the exciting things that we're hearing about here during the forum and the things that are going on at Novartis, how are you gearing up to make sure that you're going to meet demand?
Meet demand?
Yeah.
When you think about how we do capacity planning, a lot of times we have to, just like most companies in our industry, we have to put a stake in the ground. We have to look at our pipeline, particularly in the area of biologics, and we have to decide sometimes 5 to 7 years before anything has been close to coming to phase 3 that we need a new manufacturing site. Now, we're a big enough company that we're able to make that bet. We had a few years ago, we made the decision to build a biologics site in Singapore, which is our 4th biologics site globally, and we didn't know what we were going to put in it, literally. And so we made a $700 million investment based on knowing that just looking at probabilities, we're going to need it. Now, luckily, we did that because we have an anti-IL-17 called Cosentyx for dermatology, for psoriasis, but also we just got 2 new indications in ankylosing spondylitis and psoriatic arthritis, and Cosentyx is going like this. And had we not made that decision, we would have massive capacity issues. And so, again, it comes down to the complexity of working in this industry. I came from a different industry, and the first thing I did when I looked at that and said, what? We have to make a commitment and we don't know what we're going to produce at
Not for the faint of heart.
I thought, this industry is nuts. But that's what's required, because if we don't do that, we end up in a situation where we don't have the capacity.
Wow, I mean, that's an amazing thing to take bets like that. How do you, as the CEO, think about those bets, about targeted therapy, immuno-oncology? where do you sort those out within the organization? How do you actually go through that decision-making process?
We have quite a disciplined process, governance process for decision-making. We have at the company what's called an innovation management board. I sit on that board, the head of pharmaceuticals sits on the board, our head of research, head of development, and we together look at all of the projects in the portfolio, and it's essentially a stage gate approach, but it's also, we make decisions as a group. I'm not a physician scientist, but I've got Jay Bradner and Vas Narasimhan sitting in the room who are brilliant at what they do. And together, we're all able to contribute to decide where we're going to place our bets and where we're not. Now, we've made some great decisions, and we've also made some mistakes in terms of things that we've missed. But at the same time, if you look at how we are making those decisions and how we're deciding to allocate our resources, it's a pretty disciplined approach.
One of the issues that we had a chance to talk about a little earlier, and I'd love to hear your thoughts more on, is the notion of how do we take advantage of the willingness of our patients to get engaged. I'm a primary care physician, and it always amazes me what my patients are willing to do to get involved in their own healthcare. How does a company like Novartis think about that? How do you think about harnessing that?
I bring everything back to outcomes. How can you guarantee a positive patient outcome? One of the ways is to engage the patient to take control over their own health and to ensure that they're compliant. So we started a couple of years ago a digital medicines group at Novartis that is focused on digital technologies that will help a patient identify their own progress through a disease, as well as reminders in terms of adherence. And so I think it's going to be a very important piece. We're also at the very early stages. There are a lot of gadgets out there in terms of monitoring and a lot of things that I think patients will eventually move away from, but this is kind of first generation to the extent that we can make it invisible and without any requirement of action on their side, but still enable them to get the data and to be able to act on the data. I think that's going to be the holy grail.
Yeah, I do think that it's just so exciting to think about, the whole notion of patient-reported outcomes and being able to track things over time. And I agree with you, that whole notion of wearables. I think from my own experience, most of my patients who wear Fitbits are the ones who really don't need to wear the Fitbits. But I think that there are going to be some new things that shake out as this market develops. Tell me a little bit about how you, as the CEO of Novartis, how do you assess that whole portfolio? I mean, it's amazing for me to think about the notion of taking a $700 million bet on a facility that you haven't yet filled. You have all these wonderful things going on in immuno-oncology. You have targeted therapies. You have to, think about what the future of Gleevec is. How do you assess the whole portfolio, and how does that work for a company like Novartis?
Well, look, we have had great success at starting up the Novartis Institutes of Biomedical Research. And it started here in Cambridge in terms of how we will build a global research organization. Basel is another very important site for our research organization. Mark Fishman spent almost 15 years building this. We now have, Mark is retired, and we've moved Jay Bradner from the Dana-Farber in to run our institute. And his job is to keep that pipeline full. And that's really the first element, is we look all the way from starting at the preclinical stage through proof of concept to what does that pipeline look like across multiple disease areas. We then think about where we want to place our bets as it moves into development. And again, the Innovation Management Board across the company is managing this. And so that helps us to decide where we're going to place our bets, where we're going to pass, and that's really it. And it's worked in the past.
Yeah, and let me just say as a digression, thank you so much to Novartis for being part of what is an extraordinary revolution in Boston. Really making this a biotech hub, and I think one that's a real international.
It's easy to recruit here, so that's why we're here.
That's terrific. That's why I'm here too. One of the things that you talked about was the beginning of the pipeline. Can you talk a little bit about how you're satisfied with kind of the end of the pipeline, of getting through the approval process, and how that's going for Novartis?
Look, I think it's very interesting when you look at what's happening at the FDA particularly, and the degree with which the FDA is focused on bringing new therapies to medicines. I mean, we've seen a record number of approvals over the last couple of years. And so I think this is a very welcome turn of events at the FDA, starting with what Peggy Hamburg brought when she really focused on bringing new therapies to patients. Now, obviously, when you start moving into new technologies, it becomes more and more difficult. If it's not a traditional tried and true, for example, cell therapy, there's still a lot of unanswered questions. And so, but the intent is there. The intent, I think, by the FDA today is to bring new therapies to patients here in the US, and that's a positive sign.
That's terrific. So, audience question, this would not come from a simple primary care physician like me. Could you tell us more about PKC412 midostaurin? Isn't that the drug which you were granted breakthrough designations this year? When will you file?
Yes. PKC412 midostaurin is a drug that we have had in phase 3 for a number of years. It was tested in AML for patients which have the FLT3 mutation. We got a significant overall survival benefit in a disease that has not had a new therapy in many years. And so the FDA recognized that and gave us breakthrough therapy designation, and we will be filing that drug this year very shortly. So we're very pleased, and we're going to bring that drug to market very aggressively.
Can you tell us a little bit more about Novartis and CAR T therapy and what you think is coming next, what you're focusing on now, but really, what should we be excited about?
Yeah, we were first in CAR T together with the University of Pennsylvania. We are. This is a completely new area.
You're
right?
at Harvard, but we'll forgive you for that. Okay.
When you think about CAR T and what's happening, we acquired a site in Morris Plains, New Jersey, and partly because the process is the product. And so this is a situation where we are developing the drug in pediatric ALL. That will be our first indication. This is essentially proof of concept. It's not a large patient population, but these kids need this therapy. So we intend to file either late this year or early next year. We've said officially early next year when the first filing. We're also developing the therapy in DLBCL, as well as we're looking at some additional indications. So this is going to be a very exciting new area. The process is very complex in terms of growing the cells, and it's a new process for the FDA. So we're working very closely with the FDA. We are building a quality assurance level into this process that we think is going to be quite a competitive advantage, because again, there are questions by the FDA and regulators all over the world as to the standardization and the replicability of the process. And so we believe that that's one element of competitive insulation that a very large company like Novartis will have over some of our smaller competitors. Because once we set the standard with the FDA, everybody's going to have to meet it, and that's not going to be easy.
Wow. That whole notion that the process is the product, that's pretty revolutionary.
Yeah, this is it's a new technology. And so but also when you see the fact that you can actually genetically engineer a T cell and then put it back into the patient and watch it replicate in vivo, this is an unbelievable therapy that has put these kids in remission and these kids had no other therapy available. These were kids that had tried everything, and this was their last resort. And so it is our obligation to bring this thing to the market as fast as we can.
That's terrific. One of the things that we talked about earlier as well, before we came up here, was the whole transformation of cancer. And to me, what I always share with my younger colleagues is the notion that when I was a house officer at the Mass General 28 years ago, that we had 2 or 3 patients dying a week of HIV/AIDS. It was devastating. Today, it's a chronic condition. That's happened within my practicing lifetime. There's a lot going on right now that we're hearing about at the forum, and that's going on at places like Novartis. They're going to do the same thing for cancer. What are the implications of moving from kind of acute rescue therapy to managing chronic illness. What does that mean for a company like Novartis?
Well, this is where it's going. I mean, I am incredibly privileged to be able to run the company at a time when the science is advancing so fast that within our lifetimes, we're going to see certain cancers become chronic diseases. It's unbelievable how fast the technology is advancing. And I think the implication for a company like Novartis is that we have to be part of that, and we have to drive that, because we have technologies at our fingertips that our predecessors never had, and these patients need these new therapies to come to market. So, you know, and it all hangs together, right? Sustainability, pricing, and the technology that comes in. We're going to have to find a way to bring these new technologies that can turn these diseases into chronic diseases, and yet do it in a sustainable way.
Yeah, and that whole transition from illness to survivorship, I think, is another one that's going to be, I think, an incredible, opportunity, but also a big
Well, if you
challenge.
look at CML, chronic myeloid leukemia, and what Gleevec did to that disease, these patients are leading normal lives. They're getting married, they're having kids, they're living normal lifespans. And this was a disease that was a death sentence before Gleevec was introduced. Now, you're going to see this in exponentially change in other types of cancers. And that's what's so exciting about being part of the company at this time.
Yeah, what are the lessons from the Gleevec experience, and what is the future that you see at Novartis for Gleevec?
One of the lessons that we learned from Gleevec is that you can way underestimate the potential of a new drug when you're thinking about potential patient pools. So one of the things that we learned from Gleevec is there is no patient pool that is too small. Think about the patient and think about solving the problem for the patient. Let unmet medical need determine where we're going to put our resources. If there's a high level of unmet medical need and you think there's only 1,000 patients, go there. Because once you create a breakthrough, it either leads to a breakthrough in an adjacent disease area, or you find that that breakthrough has led to something that is going to be a tremendous benefit for a larger number of people. That was one of the key things, because I think at its peak we thought that Gleevec might be a $300 or $400 million drug, because it was a quite small patient population. What we missed is that we were going to keep patients alive for 12, 15, and now probably even 20 years.
Yeah, and I think that that's just such an incredible lesson about where all of cancer is going. Tell me a little bit about what you see is next. So we're hearing about lots of exciting things, at the forum. What do you see as kind of the next areas for Novartis?
Well, I'm very excited about gene editing and CRISPR technology and what that means, even from a therapeutic standpoint. So we have a relationship with Intellia, and Jay Bradner at our research organization is quite excited about this as an area. So we're doubling down on CRISPR and gene editing, and what that could mean across a variety of genetic diseases, not just in cancer. So we're quite excited about that. We're excited about CAR-T technology and where that will go. We're excited about second-generation immuno-oncology, because I do believe that we're in the first inning or maybe second inning of immuno-oncology, and what the second-generation agents are going to be able to do across a variety of cancer. So it's quite exciting time. Now, what is very important is that you have a research organization that can capitalize on that. And I think that's one of the things that I've been blessed with at Novartis, is that we have built over the last 15 years a research institute that is truly global, that is headquartered here, but also very strong in Switzerland and also Shanghai. We just opened a new research and development campus in Shanghai. So we have 24-hour research basically that goes around as the globe spins.
Beyond your own research institute, how are you feeling about, in general, kind of funding and investment in research and development writ large? United States, Europe, elsewhere. Bullish, worried?
I'm worried. I think it's a threat. It's a threat partly because of the attack on intellectual property. The biggest threat to medical innovation are health systems or governments around the world that are challenging intellectual property. We rely on intellectual property because we are engaged in high-risk activity, and that's discovering new drugs. Our investors won't let us invest this money unless we have a period of exclusivity to recover that investment. And this is where I think the pricing argument is totally messed up, because we're not looking at it at the right time period. For example, when we launched Gleevec, yes, we have a life-saving drug that has transformed a cancer. And yet everybody's focused on only the exclusivity period, which in the realm of human history is a very small period of time, let's say 10 or 12 years. But Gleevec just went generic in February in the US. So for now until the next 100 years, CML patients are going to get Gleevec for pennies a day. Think about the value that that drug will bring to human existence over a 100-year period, and then tell everybody that's talking about pricing, you've got to take that into account, because there are no generics without innovation. And that's one of the things that we're trying to communicate.
We had a chance to talk about a lot of the things that are exciting. What are the things that keep you up at night? What are the things that you worry about?
The biggest thing that I worry about is a threat to innovation, because at Novartis, we have a year this year which is quite a transition year for our company, because we lost patent protection on Gleevec, which was our biggest drug. So we're tightening our belts, and yet we're still investing more in research and development than we did a year ago. So internal meetings are going, travel's going, but research and development is staying at 23% of sales, of our pharmaceutical group sales. Now, I worry about that continuing, not just at Novartis, but about at every company. Are we willing to make the investment in research and development with the attacks on pricing, with the attacks on intellectual property? And so if that starts to wind down, I worry about how fast medical science is going to advance, because there won't be the kind of incentives that there are today to be able to create the breakthroughs in technology that we're seeing today. So, I worry about a world where there is not as much incentive, there aren't as many breakthroughs, and more people are dying.
Yeah. For you, as the CEO, we only have a couple of minutes left here. There's one question I couldn't resist asking. You're CEO of Novartis, worldwide company. Compare that to your experience captaining the swim team at Stanford.
That was a long time ago. But I'll tell you that when you're as a part of an athletic team, it's very similar to being a CEO of a company, right? I am running one of the most science-based pharmaceutical companies in the world, science-focused, and yet I'm not a scientist. But you don't have to be. You have to make sure that you have great scientists in your company. And so it's very similar in that you're leading a group of men and women that are focused on a mission, and that mission is to extend and enhance people's lives. And so I think it's very similar in terms of how we motivate, how we focus the team, how we focus resources on delivering that end goal.
Yeah, I can see it right now. You're, the leadership in the locker room and inspiration, and the inspiration you give in the boardroom. What are the questions that you wish I had a chance to ask you and I didn't? What are the things that you say, boy, here's something I really want to tell folks about Novartis and my work there?
I think you asked everything I wanted to say.
That's terrific. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really
it's good to be here.